So about a year ago, I revamped my own website for my business. You're looking at it right now, and this is it. And to do that, I followed the same process that I use when I'm working with clients to revamp their websites. And that involves a mix of internal research and external research. Internal research is when I meet with the client and talk with them, ask them a bunch of questions, and I also have them fill out a questionnaire, collecting a bunch of information from them about their business, their goals, their customers, their product. And then I go and do external research. So I talk to their customers, I survey them, I interview them, I look through their reviews. I'm doing like competitive research, all kinds of things like that. I take all that information and I put it into a document like this. I call it an insights report or a website brief. It's essentially a collection of all of that information that we've learned throughout the process. So this is one I created for my own business when I was going through the process of revamping my website. You can see it's a pretty robust report. It's 13 pages, and most of my clients' reports are like 20, 30 plus pages because there's a lot of info. My business is a little bit simpler, so I only had these only 13 pages. But you can see it's very detailed, right? Where we go into, what we know about the target audience or target audiences, every little detail about them from what we've collected, right? So I take this document and I use it to help me create or make choices when it comes to the website, whether it's the pages, what's on the pages, the order of the content, the calls to action, because what I'm doing essentially is balancing a bunch of different needs, the business's needs, the visitor's needs, and all the overlap and non-overlap between those two things. And then there's all this other extraneous stuff too. You have to think about UX and conversion and best practices. So yeah, and design, don't even get me started. But there's a lot of things you're balancing as the person, kind of running this project. So what I want to do today is I want to take this document, again, that I usually create for my clients and I have created for my own business, and plug it into ChatGPT and ask it to essentially do my job. I wanted to see, what's it going to recommend for me in terms of the pages, the content, the strategy, and see how that either is similar to what I ultimately created for my own website and how it's different, right? So we can kind of compare what it's like to use a tool for this kind of thing versus working with a person. All right, so let's go over to ChatGPT. I've already uploaded this document and I prompted it, essentially asking, this is the document, this is what it's for. I would like you to create a recommendation for me for my website. I want to know what pages you think I should include, what should be on them, the content hierarchy, the calls to action, really anything else that you think is important, right? And I think that this is, a lot of businesses might not even have this document as a starting point. So that's one kind of big difference between working with a person and the tool. Not that the tool can't pull some of things like this, but I don't think you're going to get the same level of depth and understanding that you're going to get from a person who's in the weeds doing this kind of work, right? And not to mention, you need to have all the skills to know what questions to ask and what to collect and what's relevant and what's not and what matters and what should I omit. There's a lot of questions and culling that is part of this process that I think the tool by itself, especially without all of that experience in the background, isn't going to necessarily be able to do for you. So again, we've uploaded this, we've asked it the prompt. Let's go in and see what it's coming up with. So the basic structure here is, so far it says, I need you to separate the client services from subscriber resources. So that's the first kind of piece of advice. Well, on my website, I do in fact separate the services from the copywriting resources, or, for the subscribers. So far, so good. All right, let's look at the other components or pages that it's recommending. So it wants me to have a home page. Check, got a home page. That's what this is. It wants me to have a services page. Check, we have a services page. Yay. Then it wants me to have a case studies page. Oh, that's what this is right here. Portfolio, case studies. Then it wants me to have an about page. Here it is, about page. So far similar. Newsletter and resources hub. Well, that's what this is right here. And then finally, it would like me to have a contact page. And that is exactly what this page is as well. So far, what it's recommending for my core pages in my primary navigation are nearly identical. There's some nuance in terms of language and order, but it's pretty similar. So that is good so far. And what I'd like to do now, well, I do want to call out quickly though that I'm not sure what ChatGPT would come up with if I hadn't given it this document, right? Because this document goes into a lot of detail and mentions even specific pages that need to be there in order to meet the needs of what we've learned so far. So in a lot of ways, it's pulling my own recommendations from here to come up with the recommendations here. So remember, if you don't have a document like this, and again, you don't know what the questions are to ask, or you don't know what information to pay attention to or not pay attention to, you might not get that same recommendation as that if you had this, right? Or that professional guidance. But I want to just dig really quickly into, and if you're curious in terms of what other it suggested, the footer is basically just a reflection of the primary, essentially, which is basically what I do, but I like to break things out into categories like this. And it's also asking me to, just has a couple final thoughts here. That's fine. I think let's focus on one page. Let's look at the home page and kind of just compare what it's saying to do and what I actually did on my homepage. So it's saying the primary goal is this, to guide high intent visitors, clients to my services page. Absolutely, that is what I'm doing here. Now, at least in we'll focus on the hero, but the whole focus of this page is the primary audience is the client, right? So I want the clients to contact me. I don't necessarily care if they go to the services page. I mean, that's great if they do, which is why we do include something like this where they can head over there. But the primary call to action isn't actually getting them to go to my services page. It's getting them to contact me. So that is where we're in a little bit of disagreement between me and the tool, is I don't actually think that this is the primary call to action. I think it's the secondary call to action for this audience. And I think the primary is getting them to reach out. Now, the secondary goal is to build trust and encourage subscriber signups. I would argue that I don't know if I would call it the secondary goal, because I think that for me, the primary goal is get the client to contact or go to my services page. So I'd say that's the secondary. And the third is actually this. And maybe even the fourth, because I think building trust with clients is actually the most important thing, because this is such a small part of my business. It's like 10%. So 90% of this site needs to focus on clients. So it's like little nuances like that you need to pay attention to and challenge when the tool is giving you recommendations. Okay, so let's look at the hero section. So it says website copy that converts without the jargon or guesswork. Subhead, I help establish services businesses turn underperforming websites into growth engines. I think that is good copy, but the problem is that it's a little bit generic. It doesn't really sound like me specifically. There's just, anybody can say that. And it's like, I feel like I've read that a million times. Like, I want to put my own stamp of my personality and my tone of voice into the copy, right? I'm right here. So I want my face to match the words, right? Like, I want the client to feel like when they read this, they get a sense of who I am. And I don't really feel like this does that, right? Like, I think that my copy does it conveys the same information essentially, but it does it in a way that feels more ownable to me as the person offering this service. So again, I think that when it comes to working with a tool like this, you're going to get copy that works, but it might still need work. Like, it's still going to need something to bring it to the next level, to make it feel like you and to make it special and unique, right? So I think that's where working with a person can really help you. All right, so let's talk about, it wants me to put logos here. So that actually is not a bad suggestion. In fact, if you go to my services page, I have that right under here. And I even have it further down the page right here. But I made the decision when I was coming up with my website to skip the logos here. And I don't think it's necessarily a right or a wrong thing. I just felt like personally, I wanted to connect with the audience with a conversational language first and then put the logos after. Like, that was just a decision that I made, but I don't think it's like right or wrong. It was just a personal decision. And I think like when you work with a person, they can make suggestions like that you can either take or ignore or adapt based on your own thoughts and needs, right? Whereas I feel like here you're just like, oh, I guess it told me to do that, so I should do that, right? And it's like, there's not necessarily a reason that you understand or feel like, okay, I've like put my stamp of approval on this for a particular reason. All right, then it tells me to do a pain point hook and benefit statement. Your site should do more than look pretty. It should convert. Here's how I help. I don't know about you, but I feel like this is just kind of blah. Like it just doesn't feel like me. It feels really generic. It's just like not working for me personally. Like it's fine. It's just kind of like, okay. And I feel like another thing too is like I don't necessarily want to lead with the pain always. Like I personally like to lead more with goals, positives, desirable outcomes that someone wants. And I want to reflect that back to them so they understand that I not only understand what they want, but I have a solution that will give it to them, right? So that's instead of leading with pain, I do that. I lead with, hey, what are you looking for? Is it this stuff? Awesome. I can do all that for you. And this is how I do it, right? So it's not necessarily about like, let's talk about like all the problems with your website and how awful it is. Like, I don't want to do that. That's not me. That's not my approach. And if a client is looking for that approach, that's fine. But I need this to feel like it reflects my style so that I attract the right clients, right? So that's why I feel like this is just not something I would recommend personally for my business. Then it tells me to do a brief process overview. I don't agree with that. I think like a touch like this is like all you need. I wouldn't go in depth about my process and like this is just telling you like this is what I do. These are my specialties. I'm not telling you like step 1, step 2, step 3. I don't think that content is appropriate for the homepage. A homepage, in my opinion, should be more about high level, sort of getting people to where they are, kind of treating it like a directory in a way, kind of like almost like an appetizer, right? We're not trying to get into the meat of the meal on this page. But on a page like a services page, I think going into detail about process, which I do right here, where, this is a more high level intent page. The homepage is not a high level intent page. You could land on it and leave in 2 seconds. But if someone comes to a service page, they want to know about this kind of information. That's why we put it on this page. We don't necessarily put it on the homepage. So that's where I disagree as well. All right, top case study teaser. So let's go back to my homepage really quick. I agree with this. I have a teaser section with case studies right here. So that's great. I think that's a good recommendation. And it's towards the bottom of the page, which I also agree with. I think it makes sense down there. Then it wants me to have a newsletter call to action. Again, I would not use this copy. It's just so blah. But I do agree with having that at the bottom of my site, and that's why it's right here. However, because of my business and the different audiences that I serve, I felt that I needed multiple calls to action, and that's also specific to this page, the home page, where having multiple calls to action to serve different audiences and different needs makes sense, right? But I don't think, like, if I had just followed this advice, I wouldn't have these other pretty important calls to action that are more important than this for my business specifically. The most important call to action is this right here. And it's also located I'd say this is about like the 75% mark of the homepage. And that's where I would recommend this. I would recommend the other stuff below that because they're less important, but they're still important. That's why they're lower below this one, right? So again, I think it's a good recommendation to have it, but there's nuance, right? I have to think about all of the different things that are going on and not just, oh, well, like businesses tend to put a newsletter call to action at the bottom of the site, so I should do that too. And I think that's the problem with something like ChatGPT or like, an AI tool is that they're giving you sort of like, I don't want to call it formulaic, but it is essentially, they're taking, kind of like the best practices and spitting them back out at you. Even with this document, which is like so detailed, it's still giving me stuff that to me feels like kind of like surface level. Like I feel like when you work with a person, you can really dive in, not just on stuff like this, but to really figure out specifically like, okay, maybe some of this is like a good jumping off point, but there's other things you got to think about, and you have to really challenge what the tool is telling you so you're making decisions that are going to be the best decisions for your business.